Have you ever tried to forget someone, only to have a single name pull you right back into the heartbreak you thought you'd buried? This video is the story of a bench in Denmark, a forgotten name carved into wood, a love I lost, and the version of myself I found again. If you're tired, emotionally drained, or feeling like no one understands what you're carrying, this story might be exactly what you've been searching for. A name on the bench. Picture this. You're walking through a quiet Danish park where even the wind seems to whisper incomplete sentences, and suddenly you stop, because your eyes catch a name carved into an old wooden bench. A simple name. 6 letters. And somehow it feels like the universe is playing a cruel joke on you. That was me, frozen in place, feeling as if someone had reached inside my chest and pressed a bruise I'd been pretending wasn't there. You know that strange moment when your brain works faster than your heartbeat? Mine ran straight back to a person I'd spent years trying to forget. It's insane how the mind holds on to details you swear you've erased. The curve of their handwriting, the way their voice tilted upward when they were excited, the exact ringtone of their late-night calls. But a name, just a name, hit harder than all of that combined, as if memory had been waiting in the shadows, stretching its arms like, "Surprise, I wasn't gone. I was just resting." Here's the funny thing about benches in Denmark. People dedicate them to someone they loved, someone they've lost, someone they want the world to remember. So when I saw that name, I wondered if this bench was a love letter too. A memorial, a confession, or maybe a goodbye someone never got to say. For a moment, it felt like I was standing inside someone else's heartbreak, while carrying my my brain did what brains do best. Create stories. It imagined who carved it. It imagined why. And worst of all, it imagined what I would carve if I had the courage. Because deep down, we all have that one person we would etch into wood if the world promised not to judge us for still caring. But as I stood there, I realized something uncomfortable. The bench didn't just remind me of them. It reminded me of who I used to be when I loved them. Softer, more hopeful, maybe even a little naive. And it struck me that sometimes the most painful memories aren't about the person at all, but about the version of ourselves we lost along the way. That bench in Denmark didn't just hold a name. It held a mirror. The love I left behind. There's a strange kind of silence that follows you after a breakup. Like the world turns the volume down just enough for you to hear your own regrets echoing back at you. And standing in Denmark, thousands of miles away from where everything started, I finally heard mine clearly. You don't realize how heavy a love story is until you try to carry it alone. Let me tell you about the person whose name my heart whispered the moment I saw that bench. We weren't perfect, far from it. Our love was this messy, sweet, chaotic thing that made no sense but felt like home. You know, the kind where you stay up too late talking about future plans you're both too scared to admit you want. The kind where you think forever is a place, not a decision. The kind that convinces you found your person until life proves you wrong. Back then, English wasn't just a language for us, it was a battlefield. I couldn't express myself the way they needed me to. I couldn't explain why I shut down when I felt overwhelmed or why I said, "I'm fine," when I meant, "Please don't leave." They spoke feelings fluently. I spoke in pauses, half-finished sentences, and miscommunication. It's wild how love can fail between two people who care deeply, simply because their words can't meet in the middle. There was this moment, simple, stupid, unforgettable. We were sitting in a cafe, steam rising from our cups, and they said, "I just want to understand you." and my chest tightened because I wanted to give them everything. But everything felt locked behind a door I didn't know how to open in English. That's the thing about love. No one warns you that softness requires vocabulary, so eventually, the misunderstandings piled up like winter snow, soft at first, then unbearable. One day we stopped trying to dig our way out. I packed my bags and left for Denmark, telling people it was for work, for opportunities for change. But you and I both know the truth. Sometimes we run not to find something new, but to escape the pieces of ourselves that hurt too much to look at. And yet, Denmark wasn't far enough. You can cross oceans, change countries, switch phone numbers, even pretend you've moved on. But your heart knows the longitude and latitude of its unfinished stories. Seeing that name on the bench didn't just reopen the past. It reminded me that I never truly closed it. The love I left behind wasn't dead. It was simply waiting, quiet, patient, breathing in the spaces of my life I refused to touch. Why Denmark changed me. Imagine waking up in a country where everything feels beautifully foreign, where the streets are quiet, the bicycles glide past like whispers, and even the sunlight looks like it was designed by a minimalist. That was Denmark for me. A place so calm it almost felt confrontational, because the silence left no room to hide from myself anymore. You can outrun people, but you can't outrun the version of yourself that follows you across continents. First, living in Denmark felt like stepping into someone else's life. Everyone seemed effortlessly composed. Even their dogs looked emotionally stable. Meanwhile, I was walking around with a heart patched together with denial, caffeine, and the hope that distance could dissolve memory. Spoiler alert. It can't. Denmark, with all its calm beauty, only made the noise inside me louder. There's something unsettling about being lonely in a gorgeous place. You look at the lakes, the cobblestone streets, the warm glow from apartment windows, and you realize the world didn't fall apart with you. It just kept moving. Quietly. Politely. Like your heartbreak was a tiny wrinkle on an otherwise perfect Scandinavian map. And that's when the truth hits you. Maybe the real reason you left wasn't the breakup. It was the fear of facing who you were without that person. Every morning, I walked the same path through a park near my tiny apartment. The trees stood so tall and steady, like they'd survived storms much worse than mine. The air smelled clean, almost too clean, like a place where heartbreak shouldn't exist. But mine did. It followed me into grocery stores when I couldn't find the right words. It sat with me on buses when I stared out the window pretending I wasn't running from anything. It even crept into my dreams, showing me memories I wasn't ready to revisit. And then there was the bench. The one with the name. The one that cracked open everything I had tried so desperately to bury. Denmark changed me because it forced me to slow down. It forced me to sit with feelings I had shoved into emotional storage units back home. In a strange twist of irony, being surrounded by a language that wasn't mine made me finally listen to the emotions that were. You know what's funny? People say heartbreak breaks you. But maybe heartbreak is just the moment your old self becomes too small for the person you're meant to grow into. Denmark didn't heal me. It didn't save me. It simply held up a mirror and said, "Look, not at them, at you." And sometimes that's the scariest kind of healing. A voice I still remember. There's a strange kind of torture your brain likes to play when you miss someone. It doesn't just give you memories, it gives you soundtracks. Their voice becomes this uninvited narrator living rent-free in your mind. And the worst part? It always shows up at the quietest moments, when you're least prepared, like some emotional jump scare. In Denmark, of all places where every street seems engineered for inner peace, their voice became the one thing I couldn't mute. It started with tiny echoes. A laugh that sounded like theirs. A stranger's accent that matched the way they used to say my name. Even my own voice betrayed me. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering phrases we once shared, like my heart was rehearsing a script it refused to retire. You know that feeling when you think you've healed, but one familiar sound proves you wrong in half a second? Yeah, that was my soundtrack. Unskippable. Unshuffled. On loop. I remembered the exact rhythm of their sentences, how they spoke English with this softness that made everything feel less terrifying. They once told me, "You don't need perfect words, just the courage to say them." And the irony is, courage was the one thing I never had enough of, at least not with them. Their voice was gentle, but it was also a mirror. It reminded me of everything I couldn't say back. Everything I felt but left stranded behind my ribs. People underestimate how much love depends on language. Not grammar, not pronunciation, just the ability to translate your heart without losing the meaning. I used to freeze in moments they needed honesty from me. Not because I didn't care, but because I was terrified my English would make my feelings sound smaller than they were. Meanwhile, they spoke with clarity, intention, fluency, like their emotions had subtitles I couldn't read. And yet, their voice, God, their voice, it wasn't just sound. It was comfort. It was chaos. It was home. Sometimes I replayed our late-night conversations, not by choice, but because memory has the emotional maturity of a toddler and storms into the room screaming, "Remember this?" at 3 a.m. And there I'd be, lying in a Danish apartment with IKEA curtains, listening to words spoken years ago, as if they were floating through the air vents. One night, something strange happened. I was walking past the same bench, the one with the name, and I swear the wind carried a tone that sounded like them calling me again. It wasn't real, obviously, but grief is creative. It will paint ghosts in the air just to remind you that your heart has unfinished business. And that's when I realized, I never missed the relationship. I missed the version of myself who felt safe in their voice. Reading old messages. There's a special kind of emotional self-sabotage that only lonely nights can trigger. The urge to open old messages. You know exactly what I mean. You tell yourself you're just curious, or just checking something. But deep down your heart is already cracking its knuckles like, "Let's ruin our night, shall we?" And that's exactly what happened to me in my tiny Danish apartment, with the radiator humming like it was trying to warn me not to do it. But of course, I did it anyway. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought the messages would feel distant, like old receipts from a life that didn't fit me anymore. Instead, every sentence hit like it had been written yesterday. Their words glowed on the screen with this familiar warmth, the kind that wraps around you before you even realize you're sinking. It's wild how text messages, tiny pixels, can hold the emotional weight of an entire universe. There was one message I kept rereading. "Talk to me. Even if your words aren't perfect, I want the version of you that tries." I remember staring at that line until the letters blurred. That was the exact thing I couldn't give them, the bravery to try out loud. I let silence do the talking, and silence is the worst translator of love ever created. Reading our messages felt like flipping through chapters of a book where the ending had already been spoiled. There were jokes that made me smile before I realized I wasn't supposed to smile anymore. There were little arguments where I could now see exactly where I messed up, like someone turned on emotional subtitles I never had the first time. And then there were the soft moments, the good nights and drive safe and thinking of you texts, the kind that make your ribs feel too small for your heart. But the most painful thing wasn't the words, they weren't dramatic or poetic. It was the timing. The timestamp showed me exactly when they were trying, even when I wasn't. You don't realize how many chances someone gives you until you look back and count them one by one. Science says that reading old conversations activates the same neural pathways as reliving memories. Basically, your brain replays the emotional movie in high definition. And my brain, being the drama queen it is, replayed everything. The laughter, the misunderstandings, the almost, the not quite enoughs. At one point, my phone slipped from my hand and I just sat there in the dim Danish light, feeling the weight of everything I never said. Not because I didn't feel it, but because back then I didn't know how to say it right. And maybe that's the tragedy. We think love needs perfect timing, but sometimes it just needs imperfect honesty. As I scrolled to the very last message, I felt something shift, not closure, not regret, but recognition. Those messages weren't reminders of what I lost. They were reminders of who I was becoming. When I tried to move on, there's a moment in every heartbreak where you convince yourself you're finally ready to move on. Not because you're healed, but because you're tired of feeling like your life is a paused movie and you've lost the remote. That moment for me came on a random Tuesday in Denmark, when the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or pretend everything was fine. Kind of like my emotional life, honestly. I met someone new. Not in a magical, cinematic way. No slow motion hair flip. No violins. Just two people reaching for the same carton of oat milk in a grocery store, because this is Denmark and apparently half the population lives off oat milk. She laughed first. I laughed second. And for a split second I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Lightness. We ended up talking. It was easy, effortless, comfortable in a way that didn't demand anything from me. Her English was soft with a Danish lilt, and unlike before, I didn't feel the pressure to perform the perfect version of myself. She didn't expect profound confessions or emotional clarity. She just wanted company. And honestly, I was grateful for the distraction. But here's the thing about distractions. They work until they don't. The more time we spent together, the more obvious it became that my heart was playing a game of emotional hide and seek. We'd be sitting in a cafe, and suddenly I'd notice something tiny. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, or how she laughed with her whole face. And my brain, uninvited as always, whispered, "You've seen this before." It felt like trying to paint over an old mural. No matter how many layers you add, the original still peeks through. She was kind, funny, beautiful in that calm Scandinavian way. But every conversation with her felt like walking through a museum of memories I hadn't asked to revisit. She'd ask me something personal and I'd freeze. Not because I didn't want to share, but because the answer always led back to someone whose name I still couldn't say without feeling a shift in my chest. One night, we were walking near the lake and she said, "You look like someone who's trying really hard not to be somewhere else." And damn, nothing stings quite like being seen when you're working overtime to be unreadable. I wanted to tell her she wasn't wrong. I wanted to explain that my heart was still sitting on a bench with a name carved into it. But the words stayed stuck in my throat, like they always do when honesty threatens to break something fragile. Science says the brain can't fully attach to something new while it's still grieving something old. And mine was proof. Every time she reached for my hand, my heart flinched, not out of fear, but loyalty to a ghost. Eventually, she stopped trying. Not dramatically, not angrily, just gently, the way people in Denmark do everything. She said, "I think you're still holding someone else's story." And she was right. Trying to move on taught me something brutal and beautiful. You can't fill an emotional void with a new person. You fill it by finally facing the truth you've been avoiding. And my truth was waiting on that bench. The truth behind the bench. It's funny how life has a way of giving you answers when you least expect them, usually through coincidences so precise they feel like fate with a sense of humor. Weeks after I first noticed the name on that Danish bench, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to ask around quietly, because my brain insisted that the world must hold the story behind this name. And that's when the truth unfolded in a way I could never have predicted. A local man, perhaps in his 60s, told me that the bench had been dedicated years ago by someone grieving a lost love. The name wasn't just random, it belonged to a person who had meant everything to someone else, and now lived far away, somewhere in the world I couldn't imagine. The moment he said this, I felt a strange connection not just to the name but to the universal experience of love and loss. Suddenly my own heartbreak didn't feel so isolated anymore. The weirdest part? The way it mirrored my story. Here I was in a foreign country, haunted by a love I couldn't forget, learning that someone else had carved their pain into the same kind of wood, in the same kind of silence. It was almost poetic, a reflection of the way grief and memory operate. They transcend language, geography, even time. And that's when it hit me. This bench wasn't just a marker of someone else's heartbreak. It was a teacher, a reminder that love leaves traces whether we want it to or not. It taught me that holding on to someone or something isn't about possession. It's about learning, reflecting, and ultimately understanding that some connections exist outside of time and logic. They exist in echoes, in memories, and in the quiet corners of our hearts. For me, it was a lesson about perspective. Seeing that name, learning the story behind it, helped me step back from my own obsession with what I had lost. I realized that love doesn't end with separation, just as a name on a bench doesn't vanish with time. Both endure quietly, shaping us in subtle ways we often fail to notice until years later. And so the bench became more than a memory trigger. It became a symbol of acceptance, of the beauty in endings, the inevitability of growth, and the truth that some love stories, even if incomplete, are never meaningless. They teach us how to feel, how to hold, and how to release. Sometimes the universe doesn't answer your questions directly, carves them into benches instead. Love that teaches you. Standing in that Danish park, looking at the bench with the carved name, I finally understood something crucial. Love doesn't always need a perfect ending to leave a perfect lesson. All those nights of heartache, all those moments when I felt my chest tighten for no reason, were shaping me, teaching me patience, empathy, and courage I didn't realize I had. Sometimes love's greatest gift isn't the person beside you, but the person you become because of it. I realized that the love I thought I lost had never really left me. It lived in my laughter, in the words I finally learned to speak aloud, in the small deliberate acts of kindness I offered to others, and to myself. Science even supports this. The brain strengthens emotional pathways when we reflect on meaningful experiences, even painful ones. In other words, heartbreak literally rewires you to grow. As long as you allow it, I thought I would never hear their voice again. Never feel the rush of connection that once seemed effortless. Yet, in remembering, I began to speak more clearly, to listen more carefully, to notice the subtle rhythms of conversation around me. The love I left behind had taught me how to truly communicate, beyond words, beyond language, beyond distance. And that skill, once painfully absent, became my hidden superpower. Walking past that bench now, I no longer feel the sting of what's gone. Instead, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the laughter, for the heartbreak, for the quiet lessons etched into my heart and into the wood before me. Love is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair, but it also gives you insight into your own resilience. It shows you what you can survive and even thrive from when you face it honestly. So here's the thing. Some people will stay with you, some will leave. Some voices echo forever, while others fade into memory. But every experience has its purpose. Every heartbreak, every whisper of a name on a bench, teaches you how to grow, how to cherish, and how to love more fully. Not just others, but yourself. And maybe that's the kind of love that never really ends.